Hey everyone, and welcome to Voices of Veritas, a podcast made by the church for the church. I'm Ryan Hennigan.
And I'm Michael Bashaw. At Veritas Community Church, we believe that the gospel of Jesus Christ is at work in and through us, transforming all things.
On Voices of Veritas, you will hear real stories of gospel transformation, spiritual insights, and heartfelt conversations that seek to encourage us as we follow Jesus.
We invite you to join us twice a month to listen, learn, and grow in faith together.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Voices of Veritas podcast. I am your host, Ryan Hennigan, and unfortunately, I am flying solo today. My co-host, Michael Bashaw, is a little under the weather, so he's in our thoughts for sure. But I'm really excited today because one of the things that some of our longer time listeners might be familiar with is that we here on the Voices of Veritas love to not only highlight specific parts of the life of the church, but also whom Veritas partners with, the different people, the different missionaries and ministries, and how those different partnerships work. And a big part of that is an organization called She Has a Name. Personally, ever since this podcast was originally talked about amongst church leadership, this is one of the episodes I really wanted to get to. So I have joining me today the Executive Director of She Has a Name, Courtney Schmackers. Did I say that right?
Courtney Schmackers.
Schmackers. Okay, sorry about that.
You say it how Pastor Brad says it, so that's okay.
Perfect. Courtney, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So, as you mentioned, I'm Executive Director. She's a Name. I've been in that role since we launched as our own nonprofit in 2018. But before that, I was Development Director, and I was actually a staff member at Veritas, Short North, because at the time, She Has a Name was just a ministry of the church. So now I still live in the Columbus area. I'm married. I have one kiddo.
Are you originally from Columbus?
No, I came here for school and then just stayed put.
Okay. What did you study in school?
My degree is in electronic media film, Spanish, and journalism.
Wow. That seems like a pretty broad degree.
Yes. I thought I would be broadcasting the news somewhere in Latin America.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
Anywhere in particular you wanted to land?
No. I studied abroad in Colombia.
Oh, okay.
I traveled in Costa Rica and Panama and Mexico, but
Holy cow.
yeah.
Man, maybe you should be running the podcast with all that experience. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. Love to go ahead and dive into the conversation today about She Has a Name, because as you mentioned, it started as a ministry of the church, and would love to just see kind of how it's developed and where you're at today, and just can't wait to hear that story. So we will go ahead and get started. And can you just give us like maybe a brief introduction? I mean, in the business world, like an elevator pitch for She Has a Name, a ministry originally starting by the church. How did it get started? What's the goal, etc.?
So She Has a Name's mission is to fight human trafficking through education and care for all those who are impacted. Today, we operate a number of training programs to really engage in prevention against human trafficking. And then we care for survivors and solicitors, those who've purchased sex, through some advanced care programs. So it's easy to think about us as kind of bookends to the human trafficking realm, where we're not in the trenches in crisis mode, getting people immediately out of crisis, but we are there to prevent it, hopefully from ever starting on one end, and then to care for survivors by supporting them with scholarships once they're kind of out in the recovery space.
Okay, that's interesting. And how did the organization kind of decide to be the bookends rather than kind of in the middle?
It's definitely been an evolution. I think our survivor care piece in particular is the one that's changed the most over time. So we are constantly in communication with our partner agencies around the city. There's around 24 of them at any given time. But we're constantly asking what's needed and how can we fill that need with the resources that we have. And it seemed like advanced recovery is a space that consistently doesn't really get a ton of support. There's the assumption that, of course you need addiction recovery services. Of course you need to detox. Of course you need to find safe housing. But once you've gotten through restorative programming, then you're fine. You have a job and a house and you're good. But what we found that's actually like a major point of relapse and kind of going back to their former life if they don't have like a continued support presence. So that's kind of where we've sat.
And so I would imagine that most of the individuals you work with are probably women, but you also said you work with those who are soliciting sex. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. On the survivor side, actually, we awarded our first male survivor scholarship just this semester for school. We're very excited. We've known that there have been male survivors out there, and it's just been a matter of like finding them and learning how to meet their needs. So that's really exciting. And then, yes, so purchasing sex is illegal in the city of Columbus and the state of Ohio. When you get arrested in Columbus and Franklin County, you actually come to, it's called the Solicitor Education Program, which we actually host at Veritas Tri-City. And that's a one-day class where everyone comes in to talk about personal accountability, childhood trauma, relationships, sexual health matters, and they really leave with the invitation to consider a different pathway than what led them into the room. Because we know that we're never actually going to end human trafficking if we're only caring for victims and survivors when they come out. So we care very deeply for the restorative piece to extend towards buyers who maybe are struggling with similar histories of trauma that survivors have.
Okay. So maybe help paint a picture for me if you can. So we're talking about human trafficking, right? Which I'm sure that takes multiple different forms. But when you talk about people going into relapse into human trafficking, 9 times out of 10, would you say that those are people who are trying to solicit? Because I guess when I think about human trafficking, I think about like being kidnapped and then put into a forced slave kind of trade. I'm that definitely out there, but that's not really a choice. So I guess when I hear you say relapse, I think less that and more something else. Is that accurate, or how would you describe the difference?
You bring up a very common understanding of human trafficking.
Okay.
The reality is less than 3% of human trafficking cases are kidnapping, where just like a stranger comes, grabs you, and you're now in bondage. The vast majority of cases, the victim knows their trafficker usually very well. In Ohio, actually, a pretty common form is familial trafficking, which means wrapped up in poverty and addiction, it's a family member who's actually trafficking someone else.
Okay.
Other than that, the other forms it's typically looks like a romantic relationship or like kind of an older brother, older sister, mom, dad figure that victim never had that really exploits that vulnerability of, oh, I see that you're a runaway teenager, or I see that you're an addicted single parent, or I see that you're trying to provide for family in another country. I can help you meet that need if you just do these things for me.
Sure.
And it becomes a lot more wrapped up in like the fraud and coercion piece. So that then when I mention relapse, it's because like that's often a very intimate relationship that they've left. And it's someone who knows them well, and they know it's a way to get their needs met, unfortunately. So sometimes when the pressures of trying to be stable and on your own kind of pile up, that can be what you turn to. It's what you're familiar with.
That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you elaborating on that because, I mean, I think everybody probably has something built up in their head about what this looks like. And with you kind of being boots on the ground, I think adding some clarity is definitely helpful. Let's kind of start at the beginning. What caused She Has a Name to be a particular ministry focus in Columbus in particular?
So I want to start by saying I'm not the founder. I came into the organization about 6 years after it started. So this is folklore to me.
Okay.
But the story goes, there were a few moms here at Veritas that were really concerned for their kids in particular. They had heard about human trafficking. They didn't really know too much about it. And their hearts just broke thinking not only this could be something that could happen to my kid, but that this is something happening to other moms' kids. So it started with just the name and the logo, and they started putting that on shirts and raising awareness. And over time, it became apparent that there was a lot of need in the city for education, like we just talked about. There's a lot of misconceptions out there. There's a lot of bad information or misinformation. So that was kind of when I joined the team around 2013, 14, 15. We developed our Human Trafficking 101 curriculum. And at the time we were really, we still are, we're just a bunch of nerds who just researched everything that was available in case studies, from our anecdotal experience, from interviewing partners who were on the ground. And still to this day, every year we are renewing that curriculum to make sure it's up to date, because we really found a need for that within the body of believers in responding to the injustice of human trafficking from a biblical and spiritual lens. But also out in the community, we met really great organizations doing really great work who didn't have the time to train every volunteer who came in. So that kind of became a partnership opportunity where we saw the need was to educate the community for the sake of really equipping the body to respond and care for those who are really vulnerable and broken.
Do you have any data on the city itself? I don't even know if there's a figure like that. How many people are estimated to be in the human trafficking cycle?
Yeah, it's super hard to pinpoint because so many victims have no idea that's what they are, or they aren't in a safe enough place to raise their hand to be counted in a study. But we usually go off of reports through the National Trafficking Hotline as an indicator. And that always puts Ohio in the top 5, or I think right now we're 6th in the country for cases reported. And Columbus is always in the top 25 cities in the country for cases of human trafficking, which goes both ways. Yes, there's human trafficking here, absolutely. And also people who know what human trafficking is and know the hotline is there and make cases. But I think it's still worth noting, in the city of Columbus and the metropolitan area, we see human trafficking taking the form of street prostitution, which is what most people think of in areas like the Linden neighborhood and the South Side and the Livingston corridor through Whitehall and Sullivan Avenue on the West Side. But it's also escort services and things happening in hotels around the city. It's also labor trafficking, which we haven't touched on too much in this conversation, but labor trafficking is definitely thriving, especially among our immigrant, refugee, asylum-seeking populations that come here for opportunity and then have that taken advantage of. And then getting into more of the rural areas, you see a lot more of the familial trafficking wrapped up with poverty and addiction. So it's very prevalent. It takes on a lot of different faces here in the city. Just like we have a pretty diverse Midwestern city here that a lot of businesses find advantageous for hosting their corporation heads and things like that. Also makes it a good business opportunity for traffickers, unfortunately.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the other 2 types of trafficking?
If you walk through our Human Trafficking 101, we're going to spend equal amounts of time on labor trafficking and sex trafficking. Sex trafficking tends to get a lot more airtime and resources and research because I think it's easier to identify and more simple to as simple as healing from recovery addiction in a lifetime of trauma can be. It's a lot easier legally speaking than labor trafficking to kind of identify someone and get them the help they need in a fairly straightforward manner. But labor trafficking is looking like someone that's working through forced fraud or coercion, getting paid nothing or next to nothing, or maybe they're getting paid but they have to pay their employer for housing or food or other things, so they essentially end up not making any money. It's often tied up in the biggest pressure point in Columbus is the threat of deportation, where you're not entirely legal to be here, and the moment that you try to go to law enforcement is you're going to be shipped back to where you came from. And just using that to manipulate people who otherwise actually have rights. There's a lot of protections in the legal system to say once you step forward as a victim of trafficking, you have protections in place to keep you here safely in the country and help you just legally stay here. But it's overcoming that fear of consequence and fear of the unknown and just not knowing that leaves people really stuck where they are.
You mentioned trying to do this through a biblical worldview. So can you kind of talk a little bit more about how that is integrated into your guys' mission?
Yeah, so it definitely came out of a understanding of the gospel call to love the oppressed and to fight for justice. But then once we became our own nonprofit and split from the church, one of the reasons that we split was because we wanted to become a non-religious entity. And the reason for that was a lot of things, but one of them was that so many services for survivors are explicitly Christian, that conversion and baptism are part of even receiving services for care. And we felt that that was almost sometimes used as a coercion in and of itself. If you get baptized, then you can get into this safe house with all these lovely resources. So we wanted to be intentional and like not coercing faith and spiritual practice as part of like healing. And another part was just there were so many other players in the city who weren't really engaged in the human trafficking movement because they weren't identifying as Christian or didn't belong to a church. And so making it as a more welcoming space. So today we're not a religious 501c3.
Okay.
However, because of our roots, we understand that if we only seek physical healing for someone and don't address the spiritual realm, there's still a warfare that's being waged there in a really tangible ways for the people we serve. So we do have for survivors 2 different Bible studies, spiritual support groups. One that we partner with Lower Lights Recovery that's managed by Chroma Church that has She Is a Name volunteers. So it's just this really beautiful like partnership to provide a bi-weekly study for ladies that are like 1 week to 3 months sober, just coming out of the life, just coming off the streets. And then we have a second spiritual support group that's called the Thrivers Group, and that's for survivors in very advanced recovery. Most of them have jobs, they're reunited with their family, they usually are leaders in their community or at work. And so this is a different space that really pours really deeply into their spiritual health and allows them to kind of take off their leadership hats and just be poured into. And both of those groups have been going on for years and years, and we've seen some really amazing relationships to be formed and transformation in making sure that we're caring for the whole person.
That's amazing. I don't know how much you can share or if you have a story to share, but out of all those years of doing that, is there any particular like quote unquote success story that comes to mind?
I always like put a pin in the word success because I've seen so many survivors that have been labeled successful and then relapse and even pass away from overdose. So I think of it more in the lens of transformation, which I think we have a lot of framework for in the gospel, right? You were on a certain path and then that path got interrupted. And what does this new path look like for you? And for a lot of the survivors, it's honestly the things that don't happen that are worth celebrating as much as the things that do. So it's the fact that they are able to stay with their kids and their grandkids and that those families aren't broken. That's a point of transformation. It's that they are staying sober and have a community around them, that they're not relapsing. That's a point of success, if you will. But just how they're able to articulate their sense of self-worth and their confidence that I think strikes me the most deeply. Because that often is a very powerful indicator of not going back to their former life or the worst thing that's happened to them, is that suddenly they realize that someone values them as a human, like made in the image of God, and cares deeply for them where they are, that they're shown grace and mercy that can be so transformational in terms of staying on a path towards recovery and healing.
Yeah, I love how you said that. The idea of transformation and how we have like very much a blueprint for that in the gospel. And here at Veritas, we call it our Imago Dei ministries, right? Just this idea that every person is made in God's image. And the fact that you guys are living that out in your mission, I think is very, very cool. So I would have to imagine just practically, you guys probably have a lot of interaction with law enforcement or other types of, like you mentioned, potential survivors having drug use or history of drug use. So, I mean, I'm sure you guys are all kinds of partnerships with different parts of the city. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Yeah. It used to be one of, like, we would say we're addressing human trafficking through education, collaboration, and care. And then we realized that collaboration was literally just everything we were doing. So now it's deeply part of our ethos and how we do what we do. Yes, absolutely. That's a main theme of our training, actually, is to leave with people knowing there's no single person or organization that can holistically heal anyone. And that we have to partner together to bring all of our talents together as one body to heal others.
Absolutely. It's reminding me of a phrase that I think early on in one of our podcast episodes on the rhythm, I believe it was the rhythm of mission, is people over programs, right? And so that holistic approach is absolutely key. So that's awesome. Can you tell us why you in particular got involved with She Has a Name, if you don't mind.
Yeah, my origin story is an interesting one.
Yeah.
Right out of college with my degree, I wanted to run my own video business. I did. I ran it for about 5 years. It's a story for another day, but God shut that door. And I was unemployed for the better part of a year. And about 6 months into that, honestly, out of just like kind of fidgetiness, I approached the executive director at the time. At the time, it was also, it's Amy Gingrich, the director of Veritas, Mercy and Justice at the time, and said, like, I'm bored. So just like, if you can use me in any way, like, I'm here. And she said, well, I'm like kind of pulling together a communications team for the ministry. Would you like to join? And just like making that seat at the table for me was just such a warm welcome, because before that, I assumed if I wanted to join the human trafficking movement, I would have to like work with survivors in crisis, go out at nighttime and like find people in their darkest moments. And that was not a skill set that I had, but communications I can do. So actually, when I first got started as a volunteer, we rebranded the organization just to better match image-wise how we were responding to human trafficking. I started with event photography and videography, which was very much in my wheelhouse. So I started where I was very comfortable. And then within a few months, Amy said, like, you're too good at this. Can you come on staff, please? And so I joined the staff team in June of 2016 as development director, which at the time was like very creating an organization development kind of work, where like, because it was a ministry of the church and there was like 1/3 of one staff person who kind of worried about this whole beast, there was like voicemails that needed answered and an email inbox that needed, organized, and just kind of creating structure. But from there, I'm very passionate about public speaking and education. And so that was kind of where I got plugged in next. And it just keeps snowballing.
Well, it's amazing how God definitely uses your skills as an in and the boldness that you had to just kind of approach Amy at the time and say, can you use me? I mean, that we see that all in scripture for sure, when people approach God or when he puts something on their hearts and they just say, here I am. Well, what can we do? So I'm glad that you decided to do that. So you've already kind of addressed this a little bit, especially, since She Has a Name is not necessarily a religious institution or religious nonprofit. But what are some ways that the corporate body of Veritas connects with She Has a Name? How do we support you? What does that relationship look like?
Great question to ask. So one very practical need is that our offices are housed in the Veritas Short North building. That's something that wasn't given up when we split, into our own nonprofit. And that's been a huge gift to not have the cost and maintenance of a physical space. So that's a very practical way. Veritas has always sent volunteers to serve in our organization. It's also hosting event space and training space for the community to come in. Giving financially and supporting the mission with dollars is a huge gift. And finally, just covering our staff and our programs and our people in prayer has been incredibly sustaining, equally as much as physical space and financial resources.
Yeah, that's awesome. What does volunteering look like? What can somebody expect if they were to say, hey, I'm interested, how could I help?
We have a few different volunteer paths. There's a few in the survivor care space. So we'll make sure you're really well trained and equipped to work with survivors of trauma before we can match you up either serving in one of our Bible studies, which we love to have, obviously, Christians leading in that particular space. Preparing meals for those groups as well is a great thing for community groups to just rally around. Mentors for survivors. I don't know how much I've gotten into our scholarship programs yet, but we have an academic scholarship for survivors going to school, and then a dream scholarship for survivors pursuing anything else outside of academics. And each of those scholarship awards is a financial award and a mentorship partnership to help that survivor walk towards their goal. So having believers who can, in the professional realm, say I'm in marketing or I'm in retail, and having survivors, pursuing those degrees to be able to have a mentor can be really great, transformational for them. Outside of survivor care, there's a lot of just like practical things to support the nonprofit life for things like being a friendly face when we're at community events, speaking and training in different settings, providing marketing and communication support, hosting fundraiser events, or even just kind of, grassroots sort of things in your community. If you're a musician, offering a benefit concert, if you're an artist, selling some artwork, like really using your talents that you have to support the mission in that way.
So you said the Dream Scholarship, it like partners somebody with a mentor. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
So what I love about that, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I hear, when I hear that, what I think is like, again, people over programs. Like it's very relational focused, I would assume. And it's not just like here's a grant or here's a scholarship, good luck.
You've got it right. Yeah. That was, I think, another route coming out of Veritas was that like we can hand out money and that does one thing. But if we say like, we're not just here to hand you something, we're here to actually walk alongside you and like value the journey that you're on, that brings just as much transformation. So I've definitely seen a lot of mentor-mentees that even after their like 1 year official duties are done, they stay as really great friends and as like continued relationship there because it's helping that survivor to know there's like someone, an advocate in their court that, doesn't necessarily need to be a social worker or a counselor or program manager, but just a person who they can call or text and say like, hey, I had a hard day. Can you pray for me?
Yeah.
Or I'm coming up on this decision and I just need someone to bounce an idea off of. Like to really form that relationship shows that we're caring really deeply for their whole person.
What are some of the challenges? I'm sure there are a plethora, but what are some of the challenges, maybe either specific to the Columbus area or like survivors or the people that you interact with? Like what are some of the challenges associated with a ministry like this?
One that I don't get to talk about often is the spiritual warfare. And that one can be incredibly heavy and challenging to navigate because sometimes it goes on undetected or we might label it as something else. But in terms of like staff care, board culture, volunteer retention, client success, if you will, for a lack of a better phrase, like all of that can be going poorly just because of the spiritual warfare that hugs human trafficking with like a stronghold. So I'm in the middle of 21 days of prayer and fasting at the beginning of my year because as a leader, I know how much the devil is at work in my work on a daily basis. So the spiritual realm and that warfare are a huge challenge. Other challenges, the financial one is one that just like any nonprofit is going to bring up, but we're pretty unique and we're small enough that like we don't have federal or state dollars. But since so much has shifted in the last year at the federal level and the state level, that means that like much larger organizations are now kind of competing for the same smaller resources that we used to have easier access to. And just the political and economic climate means that people are going to protect for what they need for themselves and their own lives and aren't going to be as generous. So the financial piece has been a challenge lately as well.
Absolutely.
Final one I'll probably mention is just like retention of just like staff turnover or board turnover or volunteers that just kind of drift off because it can be so intense. It's easy. I know I fall into this trap a lot of saying like, well, I don't work directly with survivors with acute needs on a daily basis. So I'm okay like mentally. And then realize like a week or a month later, like I feel terrible. Why? It's just the nature of the cause. It's being so complex. It's hearing so many challenging stories of the darkest things humans do to one another that you just have to really bolster yourself mentally and spiritually.
What are some ways that you either avoid burnout or when you do feel burned out, you address it?
Thanks for asking.
Yeah.
One of the rhythms we have as an organization is offering free counseling. So I see a counselor every 2 weeks. Just saw her this afternoon. We also have quarterly group counseling for everybody on staff where we might process a topic or an incident or something. And that's been really good, like as a team to have that priority. I have some practical things in place. I only work 4 days a week. I take a 3-day weekend to recover. And then it's just having like a squad of people around me who I can reach out to and say, this is not going well.
Yeah.
You just like offer prayers on my behalf because I can't today. Those kinds of things. And then just knowing like out of my faith practices, knowing the spiritual disciplines that fill me up, being outside, being by myself, prayer, things like that, getting creative, like tactile,
Yeah, I like it.
coloring and drawing and that kind of stuff.
Can you talk to me a little bit about just this, like the structure of She Has a Name? Kind of give us just a lay of the land there.
Yes, I'm executive director. I'm part-time. We have a program director who's also part-time, and she manages all of our volunteers and our survivor care pieces. Our board has 5 members right now. We can have up to 11 people there that are kind of across the city, different sectors. We have a survivor on the board too, just to be able to provide wisdom and perspective. And then we have like around 100 to 150 people within a year that will serve in some capacity. Yeah, that's kind of the people structure.
Okay.
Program structure, we fall under kind of the education pillar and the care pillar. Where on the education side, we have live human trafficking 101 trainings, virtual like webinars, and an online course. We offer some specialty topics like trauma responsive care training and why people solicit. And then on the care side, we have Strategies for Success Academic Scholarship, April Thacker's Dream Scholarship. This is spiritual support groups, and we partner with Solicitor Education Program, LLC, to offer solicitor care piece.
Gotcha. Okay, so you mentioned that She Has a Name kind of focuses on the bookends of human trafficking. What is I assume that you would have partnerships with other organizations that kind of handle the middle, right? Like the in crisis kind of care. What does that look like, your partnership with those organizations?
Yeah. On our website, I made a pretty graphic that helps to like unravel what can otherwise be kind of a rat's nest answer. But essentially, She Has a Name often comes in kind of in the beginning of the care setting piece to train and equip staff and volunteers. So the number one source for people who attend our trainings, whether in person or online, is by referral from an agency who says, like, it's day one of you being a resident assistant at Grace Haven, so take She Has a Name's Human Trafficking 101. It's going to help you to understand the cause. So we're kind of equipping people to serve. And then we work with the Central Ohio Region Restore Coalition, which is like around 200 agencies that meet once a month to just collaborate. We work with the Attorney General's Office Human Trafficking Initiative, the Governor's Task Force on Human Trafficking on kind of those statewide level platforms. And then we just like have really close relationships, like I mentioned, with about 24 agencies here in Columbus that meet some of those needs, so that practically it looks like She Has a Name comes up really highly on a Google search for like human trafficking resources. So I'll get a call from someone who says, I need somewhere safe to be tonight. I don't do that at She Has a Name, but I can give you a very warm lead to the Freedom Collective, who operates a 24-hour hotline with a safe house in Fairfield County. Once that survivor gets in there, then we partner with Her Song that offers long-term programming. And once the survivor graduates from there, many of graduates from local programs end up being scholarship applicants for our scholarship programs.
Okay. Wow, it's a vast network, right? It takes a village for sure. I don't want to put you too on the spot, but something, I mean, I work in public policy for a living, and I find, that kind of those facts and figures, that data, how to create a better wheel, how to solve this puzzle. I find that fascinating. And so I listen to a lot of different social data, a lot of different demographic data. And one of the arguments that I'm sure you're not a stranger to, that keeps coming up, it seems, in the younger generations, is that sex work should be considered a legitimate occupation. Now, obviously, there's different worldviews going against the gospel there. But specifically at She Has a Name, or even in like your experience working with She Has a Name, do you run into that? How do you guys, combat maybe would be the wrong word, but how do you guys kind of address that?
We come up against it quite frequently, especially in our solicitor care space. Is like, if we just legalized all of this, then how much healthier could the system be? The argument for legalization is there's more protection in place for sex workers. They can be able to screen their clients more. They can have safer forms of employment that have more regular benefits like that mainstream jobs would have. However, in the countries where they have legalized it, I'm a data nerd too. So we look at those countries and they still have huge rates of human trafficking because now you're incentivized to have legal workers, but you're still just moving them from other countries to work there. So they're there in a legal job, but before that they were trafficked from somewhere else. The other piece that I think gets tied up in it is the nature of consent. That's a huge topic. Most times that I'm testifying in a legislative space, it's because some lawmaker has said, we don't need this law, there's 2 consenting adults, and like we should just stay out of it. And the challenge there is always what I know of the stories of individual survivors is that the vast majority are not there by choice, but because that was the best choice among worst options, which doesn't make it a good choice. And once you start to unpack, they said yes to this sex work, however that looks. Before that was they ran away from home. And before that, they were addicted. And before that, they were abused. And before that, they experienced violence in the home. So like, what does consent look like for that person who's only experienced trauma and brokenness? I'm not going to say that's still a profession that they would have picked at any point in time had they had other choices. So there's problems whether we fully legalize it or fully criminalize it, right? On the criminalization side, you get into using a ton of limited resources on the law enforcement and judicial system, housing a lot of people in jails that otherwise need rehabilitative services. So there's not, unfortunately, a silver bullet to help it. I tend to not really hold close-fisted onto either legalization or criminalization. I think we need better community supports to reduce the amount of trauma that people experience that lead them towards choices like sex work.
Well, thanks for that answer. I appreciate it. Courtney, again, I just want to thank you so much for the dedication and the time that you put forward to She Has a Name and serving Columbus, and absolutely be praying for you and for the organization and the volunteers, the board. You guys are doing great work. Everybody that I've ever talked to about She Has a Name has nothing but good things to say. It's definitely God's work that you guys are doing. So I appreciate you spending the time and just letting us get to talk.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, that'll do it for us today on the Voices of Veritas podcast. We'll catch you next time.